Okay, class, let's talk about for loops in Python. Now, for loops are our first repetition structure. It just lets us repeat something over and over and over until some condition is met that lets us stop the loop. Otherwise, if that condition is never met, well, then we will tend to be in an infinite loop. And those are bad in computer science. Infinite loops will keep going literally forever until we break out of that program or until perhaps the processor melts down or something. Now in Python, for loops have this syntax, nice and easy, just for, and then we have some type of an expression. That expression is going to be what tells us how many iterations to execute here. And there's a variety of formats for these expressions. One way to do it is that, well, you can iterate through a short little list. Let's say that you made this tiny little list here of a 6 and then a 4 and then a 2, and you put that in square brackets. This will make a little bit more sense when we get to Python lists here in a couple of weeks. But if we put those in a list there, well, we can then iterate through that list, where the first time we output something, say in that loop structure, it might output then a 6, and the next time a 2, a 4, and then a 2. So it just first goes to this element, and then goes to that element, and then goes to that element. So we can do an expression that way. The way we would structure that for loop would be like this. Just like that. That would show that we're going to step through this little array, little list of 6, 4, and 2. Now, every time through the loop, we need to assign that value to some temporary variable. And what we'll use here for that is I'll just use X. You can use anything that you want, but I'm naming the temporary variable that we'll use inside the loop as X. That's user programmable, so you can do whatever you want. And then inside the loop, now that we've created that variable, we can just use it however we need to use it. And what happens is the first time through the loop, X becomes a 6. The second time through the loop, X becomes a 4. And the third time, X becomes a 2. So when we run this, we would get a 6, 4, 2. So that's one way to express this. Another way is to simply tell the interpreter exactly how many times you want to do something. And the syntax for that is going to be this idea of in range, for X in range 10. So let's parse this syntax a little bit. We know the for is saying a for loop. The X is going to be our temporary variable that we kind of tie to any operations that we want to do. And we used in before with that list like this. So we're still using the same in, but now we've got this idea of range. And we have this syntax there, range 10. And what this gives us is this is going to just return 0 through 9. Let me say that again. It's going to start counting at 0. And then we're going to end 1 less than this. So if that's 10 there, then this is going to be n minus 1 or 9. So in this case, then our output would be 0, and then on the next line 1, 2, all the way down to 8, and then a 9. Now note that it stops. It will never print out a 10. And remember that behavior. That's just standard kind of computer science behavior. And that's because the definition of this argument in that little range function there excludes the last number. And again, that's going to be common in computer science, very common. So it'll go from 0 to 1 less than that. Now we can further specify a range. Let's say that we didn't want to go 0 to 10, actually putting out 0 to 9 inclusive. Let's say we wanted to print out the numbers 50 through 62 inclusive, meaning we want that to print out and we want that to print out and then everything else in the middle to print out. So that would be this, for X in range, and then we give it the starting number, and then we give it the ending number. And remember, since we wanted 62 output, this number has to be n plus one more than we want to go. And that means that this will give us numbers between 50 then and 62 inclusive. So that's what the in range function is going to do for us. So here's some other examples of for loops. And again, a for loop is going to be our loop of choice whenever we know a specific number of iterations. And a for loop is a count controlled loop, meaning it's going to just sit there and count. And then when the number's finally done, it's going to stop. All right, let's figure out what the output of each of these is going to be. The very first one here is got the X in list format. So X will just adopt the value of 3 the first time, and then 6 the second time, and then 7 the third time. So we would get a 3, a 6, and a 7 output. Now this works for strings as well. X doesn't always have to be a number. In this case, I've got a list, but I've got strings in it with some first names. And this is just going to assign Jane to X the first time through, and to Jack then, and then to Joe. So this will output then Jane, Jack, and Joe. This next one, the third one, is for X in range 5. And we already know that that's going to output 0, 1, 2, 3, and a 4, all on their own individual lines. And then here's that last one showing, we're going to offset that by a little bit. So we're not going from 0 to something, but we're going to go from something else to something else. And we know that this is going to go from 10 to 14 inclusive. This is the ending number that's never included in the solution space. So this will output 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14, all on their own lines. We're back in Jupyter Notebook now, and we're going to look at some for loop examples. Here's one that's just simply going to use that index variable I in a unique way. We're just going to output it, but we're going to put a label in front of it. So the string that we're printing out is just I is currently, and then we're going to output I. Nice and simple. Note that there's this sequence, you know, if you want to actually output a single quote, and if you're using single quotes then to bound your string together, then if you were to code it like this, the compiler would get very confused as to, well, where's the end of the string? Because there's multiple apostrophes here. Now, one way around it is to alter which set of parentheses you use for the string. You can use double quotes also. And if you do that, well, then you can literally type out I and get the same results there. And that way the compiler will not be confused. I'm sorry, the interpreter won't be confused, because double quotes are delimiting the ends of the string. And then the single quotes are just saying, hey, I want to actually print out the single quote I here in the output like I did here. If you don't want to do that, and you're using single quotes all the way through, well, then we just put the literal sign right in front of the single quote, and that's going to literally print out that character. So the backslash apostrophe is what's known as a sequence or an escape sequence, and oops, got a little mistake in there, right there. And then there's our output. So you can use that to literally output something, just like where you can use, you know, \T to output a tab, and, you know, indentation, and so forth. All right, here's another one. This time we're going to use I not only as part of the output, but we're going to use it in a calculation. So this is a simple table of squares. In the left column is are the integers 0 through 9, and then the square of those are in the right column. So how did we get that? Well, first, for I in range 10 is going to give us 0 through 9 in our iterations. And then we're just going to print out the numbers. Here's the first number in the first set of braces, and here's the second number in the second set of braces. Note that I'm just outputting I for the first and I times I for the second. And each of these are in a field width of 5. Nice, easy format there. Now, the in range function, it can take a third argument. And if you do provide a third argument, it's going to take that as the step interval. So let's say we want to count by 2s. This is saying, okay, start at 0, go up to 10, but don't include 10, and count by 2s. And that's exactly what we got in the output. We start at 0, we go to 10, but don't include 10, and we are counting by 2. So we went from 0 to 2, 4, 6, 8. We missed all of the odd ones. Okay. Now, the print statement gives you the ability to suppress the end line character if you desire. By default, whenever you have a print statement in here like this line right here, at the end of that line, it'll always print the carriage return and give you a new line. And that's just default Python behavior. C++ does not do that, nor Java, but Python does. There's times, though, where we'll want to suppress that. And we can say, no, don't give me that end line automatically at the end each time. Let's say, for example, we have a loop like this, and we just want to iterate through this little list of food, beverage, and dessert. Well, if we normally output this using our F strings, they would all be on different lines, but we want to suppress that end line character, and we want to make them all print on the same line. So we use this sequence here, and equals, and then quote, quote. And that's saying, okay, rather than making the new line character the default end line character, make it no character at all. And this will then suppress those. Now you'll note how here in my string, after I printed out the variable thing, I also put a space right there. And that's just so that these are separated. If you don't put a space there, well then, these will get kind of munged together. So just put an extra space in there and that'll kind of separate them nicely. Or even better, we can take this and give it its own field width of, let's say, 12. And now we've got all of these spaced out into fields of 12. Here's the same thing, same example right here, but just using an integer list instead of a string list. And here we're just simply printing out I and then printing out a space. And we're going to suppress the end line character, so it'll all print out on one line. Now here's an example where we're going to use the range variable val in a couple of ways, just like we did a little further up. Here I want to print out kind of a multiplication table excerpt, just the 6s. So I want to go from 1 to 10 inclusive. So that's going to be for x in range, or for val in range 1 to 11. And that means every time through the loop, val is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So here I'm going to print out val, whatever that is. I'll print out these characters times 6 equals. And then inside here, I'm going to just have a math expression. And then that is output. We run it and we get this nice multiplication table. So hope that helps. Definitely read the book for other for loop examples and code those to get as much practice in for loops as you can.